Glenn Albrecht, bonsoir. Nous vous recevons pour une chaîne internet qui s'appelle Thinkerview. Nous sommes en direct. Est-ce que vous pouvez vous présenter succinctement?
It's good to be here, thank you. My name is Glenn Albrecht. I'm an Australian environmental philosopher. I created the concept of solastalgia, which is featured prominently in the book Earth Emotions, which I have just released in Paris with LLL. And I've been working as an environmental philosopher for all of my career. My last position was as a professor of sustainability at Murdoch University in Perth.
Est-ce que vous connaissez la devise de Sir Murdoch?
This is not Murdoch of Murdoch Press. This is Sir Walter Murdoch, an essayist. He was a famous writer and essayist in Western Australia, but not his motto. I don't know.
Il avait un proverbe sur l'éducation, qu'une bonne éducation doit vous apprendre à penser par vous-même et ne pas avaler la mode que le monde moderne essaye de vous faire avaler. Je résume ça trivialement. Vous connaissiez ça?
No, I knew that he was a wit, a very clever man, but I only knew him through the name of Murdoch University and constantly having to tell people that, no, it's not Rupert Murdoch, it's Sir Walter Murdoch. So I'm pleased to be associated with his university and his saying.
Il y avait combien de pays, combien d'élèves sur votre université?
Look, the last time I was there, it was around about 20,000, but I retired in 2014, and I have not kept track of numbers and the fate of Murdoch University in 2020.
Donc en 2020, en 2020, il y avait, si les chiffres sont bons, plus de 17 000 étudiants, 1700 enseignants et 90 nationalités représentées. Quand vous enseignez là-bas, la perception des émotions concernant le collapse écologique, le changement du biotope, quelle était la réaction de vos élèves?
It was interesting in that when I introduced these ideas as new parts of a curriculum, it was always to squeeze them into an already full or loaded curriculum of conventional thinking about conventional topics on the environment. So I would often give guest lectures or separate lectures as part of my duty as a philosopher to the university as a whole, and these were open to the whole university, not only my students. And so I would introduce ideas like solastalgia, the symbiocene, and other ideas that I was developing to test them out for the first time with an audience to see how they responded. It's always difficult to introduce new ideas in a world that's already busy and full of what people think is conventionally important.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous définir ce que c'est, nous redéfinir ce que c'est la solastalgie? Est-ce que c'est un état dépressif? Est-ce que c'est une nouvelle mémétique culturelle? Est-ce que c'est...
It's new. I would describe it as a lived experience, an emotional experience that connects the state of the territory, the region, the home area that one lives in to a certain state of mind, which I would describe as desolated. It's a mind that's in distress because it's no longer gaining solace or comfort from a place that was loved and cherished by the resident. And so it's defined as a bumper sticker definition as the homesickness you have when you're still at home and your home is deteriorating around you. More technically, it's the lived experience of negative change in your home environment, which is then reflected in the state of solastalgia, the distress that you feel about the loss that is occurring between you and your home. And I contrast that with the traditionally defined concept of nostalgia, which was defined by the physician Hoffer in 1688 as the homesickness you have when you're away from home and wish to return. So you leave home, you're in a foreign environment, and your homesickness is so powerful that it can seriously affect your physical and mental health. As a result, the cure for nostalgia was to return home, technically to be repatriated, to return to the fatherland as it was described. Solastalgia is the opposite in that you're at home, but your home environment is leaving you and you feel sad and you miss it. So the solution to solastalgia is to repair and restore and replenish the home environment so that it once again returns solace, it once again returns a sense of identity and belonging.
Si on n'arrive pas à restaurer le biotope environnemental autour de chez soi, qu'est-ce qui se passe psychologiquement et qu'est-ce que ça peut générer chez les gens? Est-ce que ça génère de l'agressivité? Est-ce que ça génère des comportements lymphatiques, démissionnaires? Est-ce que ça génère d'autres attitudes?
It can generate a variety of responses. The idea that we need to restore something so that it's an exact replica as it was in the past is not part of the definition of solastalgia. You can repair, restore to a certain extent, but you might wish to create a new environment that also delivers solace, that also delivers a degree of identity and purpose to your life. So there's no necessary connection to the past with the concept of solastalgia. So it's not nostalgia. It's by definition a condition that can be corrected in the future without an exact replica of the past. However, if your home environment is being desolated by mining, warfare, terrorism, whatever is taking place, that can be a serious change to your home environment in a way that's very difficult to address without removing the causes. And so in the case of solastalgia and my definition, I had in mind the cause was open-cut coal mining in the Upper Hunter region of the state of New South Wales in Australia. And this coal mining extended over hundreds of square kilometres. And so the solution to their solastalgia was to fight the coal mining. So it does invite a response, and the response can be anything from let's plant trees and make the place look green again to we have to fight multinationals and the state government and the Australian government if we want to alleviate our solastalgia and return our home environment to a place that gives us solace and comfort.
C'est pas trop tard d'entreprendre ce type d'attitude, de restaurer, de planter des arbres, d'essayer de vivre en communauté, avec un capitalisme qui est galopant, sans boundaries, sans contrôle, sans toutes ces choses-là. Est-ce que la société qui consomme de façon exponentielle n'est pas devenue tellement importante que, je dirais, des pensées utopistes ou de prise de conscience de la solastalgie, c'est pas un peu trop tard?
If it was utopian, it would be too late, because utopia is a state that cannot be achieved, even if it's desirable. I would argue that solastalgia is a realistic and rational response to an irrational state that humans have put themselves into. And as such, they can take themselves out of it again. It largely becomes a matter of will. The reason why I retain the position that it's not too late is that as an old hippie, I lived through the 1960s and early 70s at a time where people thought that radical change could take place. I've lived through the the removal of the Berlin Wall, where one day somebody would say could never be changed, it's never going to be removed, and then the next day there are images of young men and women with axes and hammers knocking it to pieces. So don't tell me that change can't occur and that it can't occur quickly. I've seen it happen. We were fighting in the 1960s and 70s against nuclear annihilation. I protested against the French for bombing Muir Atoll, so I have to be fair. I have history here. I protested against the Americans for starting the war in Vietnam and for Australia participating in it. So I think I'm one of those not okay boomers. I actually can see that this lived experience of social change and the potential of social change is something that is still with us, and I see it in Generation Z. Greta's generation, they don't have a stake in the present. They can see that they won't have one in the future either unless things change. So I'm of a mood to participate in that change process, despite the fact that I'm now 67, have retired from formal working life. But I consider myself to be an old hippie who's ready to be re-radicalised at any moment, and hopefully hope that process will continue.
Je vais me faire l'avocat du diable. Est-ce que vous connaissez le volume des produits dérivés sur les marchés financiers? Est-ce que vous connaissez l'interconnexion des produits dérivés ou des produits financiers avec les fonds de retraite? Est-ce que vous connaissez l'intrication du système financier dans notre propre vie de tous les jours?
I know the Australian context reasonably well, and I've seen the issues with the attempt to limit the pension in France, to increase the age at which one is entitled to such things. I've seen the social outrage at that, and I can understand that people with a huge stake in the present will have just such a reaction to anybody that wants to take that away. But I see those issues as subservient or lesser issues than, for example, global climate warming, global climate change. There are issues that will smash pension systems. There are issues that will smash the economies of whole countries. So as far as I'm concerned, if proportionality of effort is required, that we put the best effort into the things that are most important, then I can understand why some people stop at the level of their pension fund and how much money they'll have in the future. But I also think it's possible for people to see much further than that, and to see that the Russian dolls are nested in such a way that pension funds will be meaningless in a world that has no viable climate system, a depauperate ecological systems, mass extinction. It gets to the point of the Australian wildfires where when your house is burning, as Greta would say, your priorities change very quickly.
Comment vous percevez l'attitude du pouvoir politique, l'attitude du pouvoir industriel face aux défis et aux menaces que représente le changement du biotope? Est-ce que vous considérez qu'ils sont à la barre du bateau pour gérer penant malant ce qu'il y a à gérer? Est-ce qu'ils font une politique symptomatique? Est-ce qu'ils ont un prisme de lecture à long terme? Ou est-ce qu'ils sont devenus totalement mégalomanes, investis d'une mission divine pour continuer ce système qui les a toujours engraissés?
I have to agree with your concluding remarks. I call it corrumpelism. Corrumpe means to destroy, so it's even more powerful than to corrupt, which just might mean a scratch on your vinyl LP, or there's too much dust on your CD. Corrumpelism means that you're systematically destroying the foundations of life. So the political and economic system that we've created is now in a process of self-destruction, and I can only speak of the Australian political system with some authority because I live in Australia, not because I'm a political scientist. My observation there is that we have a classical case of a political class that's been corrupted to the point where they are not governing, they are governed. And the forces that govern them are corporations, mostly multinational, but many of them are national Australian corporations with huge amounts of investment in fossil fuel industries and their future. And so we have a system similar to that of the United States where large-scale corruption takes place through donations to political parties, brown paper bags full of money. Corrumpelism takes many forms. And as a result, we have a system of governance which is in denial of science and the scientific realities that we have to face. But it's so self-interested and so selfish in its direction that it requires a massive acts of bad faith to even appear in public and pretend that you're concerned about the future, even the future of their own children. So I see this as the collapse of government as we have known it. It's not necessarily the collapse of democracy, but I see corrumpelism as a new force which is systematically destroying the foundations of the life that other humans can live and clearly the other life forms that we share this planet with.
Comment vous anticipez le futur de la classe politique? Est-ce que vous pensez que la classe politique va se tendre, va se durcir, va se raidir face au peuple et raidir face aux nouveaux défis en continuant à prolonger ce schéma intellectuel? Ou est-ce que vous pensez que la population va réussir à prendre conscience et ensuite à faire prendre conscience des choses à la caste politique?
The public is becoming aware, and the example I gave you a moment ago about the bushfires in Australia, that was a mechanism or a means whereby all of a sudden there's a regime change from, well, maybe we don't care or maybe it's not that important, to all of a sudden it's one of the most significant things in people's lives, perhaps the most significant thing. And it's estimated that at least 2/3 of the Australian public were directly or indirectly affected by the fires by virtue of relations with those who were directly affected. And it's a huge hit to the economy as well. Not to say things like the loss of life for humans, the loss of their property, and the estimate is, 1 billion or so vertebrates that were lost in the fires, cuddly, happy, charismatic megafauna like kangaroos and koalas. So as a result, we are seeing the public putting pressure on our politicians in a way that I haven't seen in the last decade. Let's just narrow it down to that. Personally, I've been fighting these causes for much longer than a decade, but let's just say in the public domain, there has been a tiny minority of Australians trying to change the political climate. With all the science, with all of the lobbying and hard work that green activists have been engaged in, has really achieved nothing. But the bushfires have changed everything in an instant. It's a bit like the Berlin Wall moment. And our politicians are struggling to understand this regime shift. It's like a strange attractor has entered the debate and they have no control of it, and their media departments don't know how to handle it. I think this is not a short-term response either. I think it's now become ingrained in the Australian public. So we have, for example, our Prime Minister is a believer in the Pentecostal church. I don't think he's uncomfortable with the idea that the world could end tomorrow and that he and his own children will go with him. I think he's a believer in the rapture and that the believers will be saved and the non-believers will presumably burn, if not in hell, in the eucalyptus forests of Australia. So as a result, that kind of leader has no place in the future of Australia. And we now call him Scotty from marketing, because that's all he does. He spins endlessly the same old story about how great economic growth is and how wonderful a balanced or surplus budget is. It's like the parroting of these mantras every day is now becoming, it's not just boring to Australians, it's becoming offensive, because these much bigger issues, these are life and death issues that are impacting on the lives of ordinary Australians. So I think this idea of the regime shift or change, a strange new attractor has entered the consciousness of the Australian public, and it's to do with climate change, but it's also the whole environmental package. It's the idea that we can no longer just continue to be the great quarry of the world and export coal and minerals like iron ore. It's the end of the idea that Australia can exist as a service economy and import everything from China. The bushfires and the latest virus make it quite clear that a just-in-time, globalised, homogeneous world is a dangerous one, and that it takes one thing to go wrong and everything else begins to fall down. A more technically resilient society would have more diversity, would be less reliant on flows that are so delicately poised between chaos, failure and just-in-time efficiency. So I think it's a long answer to your question, but it's not too late. And the science tells us that if we act with strength, intelligence, rapidity now, and do this for the next 10 years without any break from that intensity, we can put ourselves on a track that will at least avoid catastrophic environmental and climatic collapse. And I take it as a clear warning from the science and scientists of the world that if we don't do that, we will be in serious trouble.
Est-ce que vous avez vu le film Idiocratie?
No.
Alors, on vous le conseille. Pour vous le résumer succinctement et trivialement, un monde où les gens ne sont pas très futés, pas très intelligents, dirigés par une caste politique tout aussi stupide et stupide. Est-ce que vous pensez que le XXIe siècle, la masse de gens pris dans leurs problèmes, pris dans une distance par rapport au biotope, pris par la vitesse du monde, est-ce que cette masse de votants ne va pas se mettre à voter pour le plus populiste, pour celui qui dira « je suis le président du pouvoir d'achat, je suis le président qui va vous permettre de vous chauffer à tant de degrés, votez pour moi, ça ira mieux ». Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas que cette masse facilement instrumentalisable est trop importante pour pouvoir renverser les choses? Cette masse qui est hypnotisée.
Look, I accept that is happening. I accept that it's a massive global problem that we have to confront. The purpose of writing my book was to try and subvert that process in my own way, which was to attack them through the emotions that the science doesn't seem to have triggered a great deal or any meaningful change. The political class and its bureaucrats are too invested in the past to bring about any meaningful change. So I seriously engage in what would be normally described as revolutionary thinking, even by declaring World War III the war of the emotions. It sounds very binary, but I'm prepared to get into a Greek drama or a Greek tragedy where the forces of evil and destruction confront the forces of good and creation. And I think we're at that kind of tipping point now. So as I said with the example of Australia, we've gone from a state of being sleepwalking to a state of being awake. What happens next is crucial, and so we either get seduced and hypnotised by the spin, and the fires actually don't make any difference. We don't even learn from these catastrophic conditions and disasters that we use the word unprecedented in English, and now the science is telling us that nothing like this has ever happened in the history of Australia before. So this is unprecedented, and if it can't bring about change, then I will gladly line up with you, grab some good bottles of red wine, sit in the corner rocking back and forth, moaning. Yes, I'll be doing whatever I can to ease the pain, because that's all that would make sense. The Polish Marxist Kolakowski once described, if you believe in the iron law of progress as history, and the scientists tell us that the age of ants is coming, and that's the science, then the only thing that you could do to assist progress would be to voluntarily lie down on ant heaps and let them eat you. And I've always thought there's something deeply disturbing about the idea that if you have this belief that the future will unfold only in a particular way, and that this, if it's not progress, it's going to be inevitable. I'm of the mind that nothing's inevitable, that we are capable of generating a momentum, the creativity needed to address this issue, and that to fall into perpetual paralysis, anxiety, despair is a guarantee that that future will unfold. So you're more or less saying, by my eco-paralysis, by my fall into a form of debilitating trauma, that I'm not actually able or not going to be capable of doing anything to change that situation.
Tétanie.
Titanizing. I'm not sure what you mean there. The idea of...
You're paralyzed by the stuff. The name is tétanie.
Yeah, I'm not sure what...
Okay, never mind. I've got another... pardon, j'ai une autre question. Comment on fait pour mettre le monde en psychothérapie ? Parce que quand je vous écoute, j'ai l'impression qu'on est dans une société profondément malade avec des gens parfaitement adaptés à cette société profondément malade. La question, c'est comment on fait pour mettre ce monde sous psychothérapie ou lui montrer qu'il est profondément malade. On s'occupe physiquement des politiciens. On organise des manifs de hippies, on fume des pétards, on a des fleurs dans les cheveux. On fait quoi ? Ou on tombe dans le radicalisme, l'activisme radical, comme Extinction Rébellion. Est-ce que vous soutenez Extinction Rébellion ?
Yes, Extinction Rebellion is one of the responses, but I'm surprised and relieved in some respects that my work has relevance to more than politicians and to more than my fellow academics. I have punk rockers and heavy metal merchants that have adopted the language that I'm offering the world to understand our situation. And so artists, musicians, other types of created people, filmmakers, even video makers, showing an interest in reconceptualizing the problem as an emotional one. It's not one that is a biomedical problem that requires therapy or medication. This requires a confrontation with ourselves, an uncomfortable situation where we begin to analyse the role that humanity plays in its own destruction. And that is expressed through the current model of economic and industrial and technological production and consumption that we have. So I see the issue as one of, there are many ways of awakening what E.O. Wilson called our biophilia. That if biophilia is innate within us, then you can push us very hard in the opposite direction. We can become necrophiliacs. We can begin to enjoy the destruction that goes on around us and even get pleasure out of it. But that ultimately, as a social species that requires a long period of nurturing its young and raising its next generation, there lies within us the ability to see the opposite of the ecocide, the opposite of the necrophilia, eco-necrophilia, if you want to give it a name. And so I would argue that the harder we push on the negative, on the destructive, the closer we get to people seeing that there is an opposite, that we do have within us the very tendencies that have enabled us to succeed as a species with other species on the earth. And so I write about the opposite of the negative earth emotions that are overwhelming us now. They're only negative because we understood, appreciated, or have within our unconscious, to use an unpopular term, the opposite feelings. You can't have those negative, deeply depressing, deeply disturbing feelings without some sense of a desirable place where one could have their positive earth emotions flourish. And in order to help us understand that and appreciate it, I create the Symbiocene, which is the opposite of the Anthropocene. So I see the Anthropocene as a wonderfully accurate and appropriately descriptive account of where we are right now. We are a dominant species on the planet. We are moving, shaking and driving every single process that's going on. And at the same time, as the Anthropocene triumphs, we become tragic failures as a species. And so the connection has to be made in logic, but it can also be made in many other ways through the creative arts and the as I mentioned, you can begin to give expression to the negative through heavy metal and punk rock if you want to, through rap, through art, through other forms of human creativity. It's not just an intellectual issue. So the confrontation with that which we would prefer to evade or not to look at is happening whether we like it or not. And so this challenges consciousness. My role in all that is to provide a language that helps people upset the norm, to upset what's conventional, to upset the past, because I think to be locked in the past, to even use the language of the past now, is to be part of the problem.
Donc je comprends bien que les intellectuels doivent fournir la mallette à outils de compréhension du langage. Mais quand en face, on a une classe politique, une classe de cabinets de communication qui prennent le contrôle de la dialectique et qu'on se rend compte que l'appauvrissement culturel, l'appauvrissement de la maîtrise de la langue, que ce soit la langue anglaise, que la langue française, est-ce que... je vais être encore dur, est-ce que c'est pas du wishful thinking de hippie et que vous êtes dans votre propre bulle et vous vous rendez pas compte qu'il y a une masse informe de gens qui ont la tête dans le guidon dans leurs problèmes et que l'inertie de cette masse informe nous emmène vers le mur?
I can agree to a certain extent that inertia is there. So within the language I'm evolving, we talk about eco-paralysis as a form of inertia. We're locked into a system that we can't seem to be able to change at a personal level. Changing the light bulbs is not sufficient. It's also deeply psychological or psychiatric, that our problems are also affecting our ability to see clearly and to make a transition in the way that would bring about a better quality of life even for ourselves. So I'm fully aware of those problems. So I have to get back to a point where, why would we want to change? And at one level it's because, as I argued previously, the negative entails a positive. The worse things get, the more we realise that we've shifted from a life-affirming species to a life-denying one. The more we want to deny our positive earth emotions, the more valuable they become. And I argue that we've taken them for granted in the past. We haven't had to discuss, name them, because they were freely available and they could be had anywhere without us having to think about them. And now we have people seeking out places to be eco-tourists, the last places on earth that are relatively pristine and intact, you know, so it's like disaster tourism. The tourists actually become the cause of the next environmental disaster. So I understand completely how we're locked into this system, but the earth itself is telling us that we are transgressing in a way that is entirely self-destructive. And so I don't wish to personalise the earth. I don't want Gaia as a name to suddenly become like a person and have agency and become animistic. I'm too hard-headed a materialist and realist to actually go that far. But when your country starts to burn down literally, it's no longer Greta telling you, change us because your house is burning. It's actually, it is burning. It is now such a severe impact. And if you're Inuit and living in the Arctic, your permanent sea ice is disappearing. If you live in Florida, your garage is filling with water and there's an octopus in it. You know, it's actually happening. In other parts of the world, the evidence is in your face, as they say in Australia. It's no longer theoretical. You may be lucky in France and that all that's happening is some of the red wine varieties are not growing so well and you're having to import hot climate grapes from southern Spain or Italy or somewhere. Well, that just is not a tragedy of global proportions, but it's the beginning of a process where you see gradual and slow or chronic change, and that happens for a while and people tend to ignore it. So it's like slow poison. When the change is rapid and dramatic and it's scary, you know, it's really, it frightens people, frightens them to the core. That's quick poison, and that generates a very different response. And so I'll go back to the case study of Australia. In denial, sleepwalking, not caring about anything much except themselves, the football,
barbecue.
The barbecue.
And the beer.
All the good things in life is Australia has in plenty. But I wrote recently that because it's been so hot and the drought has been so severe and the fire risk is so great, you're not allowed to have an open fire. So the Great Australian Barbecue is cancelled because there's a total fire ban for the whole of New South Wales for 5 days in a row or longer. And that is a wake-up call. It's telling people that business as usual cannot be practiced. It's like having a coronavirus enter your back garden and shut down your barbecue because you are not allowed to share this experience with anyone else, because the risk of setting fire to your neighbour or to the bush, the forest near you, is too great. So it's the sudden imposition of a reality that most of us would care not to think about. We want to evade it. We want to avoid it. And Australians have been excellent at that, right, just as good as the French, I'm sure. We're right up there in the top league for ignoring reality. But when it comes and hits you really hard, it's something that you can continue to ignore it, but it will gnaw away at you. It's going to affect your psyche. It will affect the way you relate to everything from that point onwards. And so it's this changes everything moment.
Vous savez, en France, quand on prend conscience des choses, on a une technique qui est ancestrale. On coupe des têtes. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on va revenir à un éco... Est-ce qu'on va en arriver à un éco-terrorisme?
Being a pacifist hippie from the late 60s and early 70s, I'm fully supportive of a Gandhian approach to change. But I also accept that humans are inherently violent and warlike. I call it the terraforan, earth destroyers. They're amongst us. They live within us. It's part of our psyche. So I've tried to address that by arguing that this World War III, the war of the emotions between the terra nascent or earth-creating people and the terraforans, the earth destroyers, has to reach some kind of open conflict. And my way of dealing with that was to admire the way conflict between male black swans is sorted out. And they do it by intimidation. They'll swim in a mirror image of each other up and down a lake for hours on end. There doesn't appear to be anything going on, just this synchronized image of each other. And then all of a sudden it stops and one breaks off and flees. It's a form of intimidation, warfare by intimidation. And I realized that, I call this in the book, the need for green muscle, that we need strong people who are not intimidated by bullies, fascists, eco or otherwise, are not going to be frightened by the neo-right who use intimidation as a way of bringing about their version of social change. To pretend that the world doesn't have these people is to be genuinely naive. So I've argued that we need to confront what is going on with a force that's proportionate to the opposition that we face. I'm also aware of the murder of environmentalists. Do you want me to stop for a minute?
Non, it's okay. On a juste une lampe qui s'est éteinte, mais on va gérer.
Well, let there be enough light.
Donc ça tombe bien, je vais pouvoir vous couper. Est-ce que vous connaissez la psychologie des foules de Gustave Le Bon? Est-ce que vous avez étudié la psychologie des foules? Et est-ce que...
I have, but not through Le Bon. I've looked at some aspects of the psychology of crowd and crowd behaviour. It's a literature that must be related in English languages, in the English language.
Vous savez ce que dit Gustave Le Bon sur la psychologie des foules?
No, you tell me.
On vous le conseille chaleureusement. Je vais vous poser une autre question. Est-ce que vous savez ce que ça veut dire Homo homini lupus est?
Yeah.
L'homme est un loup pour l'homme.
So is this suggesting that humans are like wolves in that they will or will not support each other? I'm not sure what... The social life of wolves is very interesting.
Est-ce que vous connaissez les Black Blocs?
No, I can't help you with that one either.
Est-ce que vous avez déjà vu que sur certaines manifestations, de temps en temps, il y avait des gens plus déterminés pour aller au contact avec les forces de l'ordre?
Right, yes, I have seen that.
En France, on les appelle les Black Blocs. Je pense qu'en Australie, on doit aussi les appeler les Black Blocs. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ça? Est-ce que c'est...
I don't think so.
Non.
They're there, but they're not called the Black Blocs.
Ok, on espère qu'ils aient la même fibre. Est-ce que vous cautionnez ça?
They do, yes. They have the same favour.
Est-ce que vous cautionnez ça? Est-ce que vous trouvez ça normal qu'il y ait des gens qui décident de prendre d'autres voix pour se faire entendre?
I think it's okay to intimidate others in the way they try to intimidate us. If it crosses over into actual violence, which requires arms, guns, then it becomes part of the same problem we're trying to solve. It'll just end up in mass annihilation of one lot of humans against the other. So I see the path as non-violent, not just because I'm a pacifist, but because I think it's the only way we're going to achieve genuine change. But as I've argued, I've seen how potentially violent situations can be resolved in traditional societies of humans, and I can see it in black swans. So I don't see that we can't try it. Strong men and women and people of other genders work out in the gym and become strong without achieving anything. They don't even produce electricity. It would be really good if we could put all that energy to some good cause. And so it's not a central idea to my thinking, but I've been aware that the death of environmentalists is now a huge problem throughout the world. They're assassinated by those that wish to stop their work and to stop their activity. So in the book I even entertain the idea that where environmentalists are being murdered by those who wish to continue to kill rhinoceros for their horns, for example, there's a case for actually taking arms against those people and eliminating them. How do we draw the line between intimidation and fighting actual violence? It's incredibly difficult, but where people are being murdered, I don't think there's room for just turning up with a bit of green muscle and trying to intimidate people. That'll shoot you. So I'm a realist about the extent of the violence which is being directed against those that are terra nascent or earth nurturers, earth creators. I don't pretend in the book that this is something that has easy resolution, but the alternative is something that I see clearly, which is no future.
Quel regard vous portez sur les institutions internationales quand on voit l'échec des accords de Paris, l'échec de Kyoto, l'échec de la COP 21? Est-ce qu'il faut qu'on fasse sans la caste politique? Arrêter d'attendre ces commandements venant d'en haut. Est-ce que c'est à l'échelle locale qu'il faut s'organiser?
Well, it's at all levels, at all times and in all places. So there's not one level that is going to exclusively change this situation. But you're right in that the current political leadership does not seem to be in a position to govern in a way that will bring about this change. As I said to you before, in Australia, our politicians are governed. They are not those people who are doing the governing. So their minders are those that are paying for their largesse. They're paying huge donations to political parties. They're making huge donations to organisations that support them in the form of think tanks and other organisations that will ensure this circle of influence between politicians, corporate bodies, advisors, policy makers. They all are now interchangeable. It's not they're not different systems. They are a systematic process that closes the circle of power, such that democracy in its purest so-called form is excluded. It doesn't matter what people vote any longer. There's no difference between the major political parties. So yes, I suggest that democracy is highly anthropocentric. It by definition deals with issues amongst human beings. We're now dealing with issues to do with the global climate and with species extinction. Democracy has to be widened beyond the demos, and I argue for symbiocracy, which is a form of governance for all life rather than just human life. And so the point is that it's like throwing a conceptual hand grenade into our existing ways of thinking. I don't for a moment think that symbiocracy is going to take over the world tomorrow, but if I can get people to question the validity of the demos, why is it that we're accepting that the form of governance that we have now should be government of the people, by the people, as if that's the only thing that matters on earth? It's highly, it's full of hubris, it's full of the same arrogance and dominance and titanism that we've had in the past. So I'm trying to get people to think differently, and that's the point of my new language, is to say of anything, like I think we've failed with concepts like sustainability, yet I was a professor of one. And people say, well, what's wrong with sustainability? Isn't it a nice concept? And I said, well, maybe it was, but it's now been appropriated by the corporate class to justify their own existence. Everything's become sustainable now. It's like resilience. It used to be a bunch of wonderful academics in Stockholm arguing for something that seemed like it was incredibly sensible and a good direction for humans to go. Who could argue that we shouldn't be resilient? Now Trump uses the word resilience to avoid addressing the issue of mitigation of the causes of climate change. The Australian government uses resilience for everything because it sounds good to say it, and people think that it must mean something important.
Transition écologique.
Another one, that transition to what? It's a meaningless term. So we're full of these things. Like I tried when I was teaching to get my students to see the difference between genuine resilience and perverse resilience. Perverse resilience is the persistence of things that should go away, and yet they, like bad smells, they just hang around and you can't get rid of them. And so resilience becomes a negative condition when things that are undesirable become seemingly impossible to shift. And so I'm beginning to see the role of language as playing a crucial role in the maintenance of our current system. And so if you, like me, are interested in the potential or possibility of change, then not only do we attack them through the science and through political ideology, which is another avenue that other people have explored in much more detail than me, but if we use language to explode and expose their failure to have a coherent emotional makeup, it's a bit like in the film The Wizard of Oz, and the screen is pulled apart and the great wizard's just a cranky old man pedaling furiously away, pretending to be powerful when in fact there's really nothing there.
Si je vous dis, on ne peut pas ressentir ce que l'on ne peut pas verbaliser, est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec ça?
I think there's much truth in that. There may be feelings that are nevertheless important that we still have failed to articulate. So the way I would take that comment would be to go further and say that I now write about the extinction of our emotions, that we live in a culture that is taking our ability to have emotional engagement with what is important away from us. It's a form of sanitizing it's called the Mook world in many contexts, that we're just reducing the world to some kind of meaningless, dull haze. So again, back to the role of language. If we can expose the way language is being used to deaden our senses, we can also use it in the opposite direction as a way to reawaken our senses, to stimulate them. This is the role of the arts and creative people in how my work might have greater impact. So I'm on a mission, if you like, for us to create the terminology, the conceptual frameworks, the words that actually are needed to describe this new world we've put ourselves in.
C'est aux gens de se les approprier.
Of course, and to create.
Comment?
And to create them themselves. I mean, I see my role as subversive. It's to say, why should we accept the language of the spin doctors and the current politicians? Not only are they boring, I mean, most people just turn off when they hear it. That's not listening to a robot. Automatons, they just get asked questions and they have programmed answers. It doesn't matter what the question is, they'll always give the same answer. And so I think we're now in an age where people are sick of that and can see it's a form of falseness that's now blatant. People don't even pretend anymore to be telling the truth.
Je vous ouvre une parenthèse. Avant que le direct commence, on a discuté un petit peu de votre voyage en Allemagne et vous m'avez dit que c'était beaucoup plus facile de rentrer en France. On ne vous a pas posé de questions. Mais quand vous êtes rentré en Allemagne, là, vous êtes fait attraper par la douane et ils vous ont posé beaucoup de questions. Pourquoi, à votre avis, vous ont posé des questions? Just a few, but like what?
Well, I think if I went to the United States, there'd be many, many, many more questions asked.
Ils vous mettront peut-être un petit toucher rectal au passage.
I have to say, in all honesty, that's happened to me in the past. I was in Canada at the time of the Twin Towers attack, and I'd made an arrangement to go and see an academic who I respected greatly, Murray Butch, an eco-anarchist, who lived in Vermont. And to get from Canada into the United States involved some really major racial profiling for a start. I'm not your conventional white person. Disbelief that I was connected to a university, and I had to go through the whole process of convincing them of my bona fides. As my wife and later my children joked, it's lucky I had a white trash family. Otherwise, they would have held me for a hell of a long time. So that process of being profiled has happened to me many times. So I understand what's going on. I was arrested for being a Moluccan terrorist while a backpacking hippie in Holland in the 1970s. So I have a long track record of being profiled in a way that can make life uncomfortable.
Est-ce que vous avez été arrêté en Allemagne pour vous poser des questions? Parce que l'Allemagne produit du charbon, exploite du charbon. Est-ce qu'ils ont fait le parallèle entre l'éco-hippie terroriste australien qui vient peut-être armer les consciences et les esprits en Allemagne? Est-ce que c'était une démarche dissuasive, d'intimidation?
I wish I was so famous that was true, but alas, it's not the case. I think the Germans were just being
Vous avez eu
systematic.
qu'un seul doigt, pas deux, c'est ça?
Yeah, that's it. Just the one finger. So I thought my entry was relatively peaceful compared to my attempts to enter the United States of America, and at times even to go back to Australia. You go through more bureaucracy and administrivia than just about any other country. So I don't blame the Germans for wanting to know why I'm entering. And maybe it's because if you enter Germany, you enter the European Union, and that means ipso facto that you've entered France as well, so you don't have to actually go through the same process. I don't know. I don't know the bureaucracy of the European Union at all well. All I know is that the British want to get out of it and have succeeded, or at least they think they have. So it's going to be hard for them to enter Europe. They'll have to go through the same questions about why do you want to come? What are you doing? Where are you going to be? And I think it's a breakdown of the trust that people can have in international travel. And that's a consequence since the Twin Towers attack and international terrorism has made its impact on the world. But that's a different issue.
Je vous ouvre une parenthèse, je vous coupe.
Okay.
Imaginez qu'un groupe terroriste avait brûlé autant d'hectares de forêt en Australie, avait tué autant de koalas et de kangourous, avait mis un bordel tellement monstrueux. Est-ce qu'on serait déjà en guerre contre eux? On aurait déployé les avions, les porte-avions, les systèmes de renseignement, tout ça. Ça vous fait pas bizarre qu'il y ait cette détresse environnementale et que le mouvement Va-t-en-guerre contre cette menace soit vraiment rachitique par rapport à la réponse hypothétique qu'ils auraient déployée contre un mouvement terroriste?
Look, it's slightly tangential, but the Australian government tried to blame environmentalists for the fires. That was one of their first calls, that because environmentalists were stopping the management of forests through what is called prescribed burning, management through fire, they argued that the greenies caused the fires and that we should therefore stop any regulation that they had caused to prevent us from burning Australia, to protect it from burning even more brightly. So this ideological warfare took place within hours of the fires impacting over the whole of Eastern Australia. So the blame game was a battle, an ideological battle going on in Australia, which it hasn't stopped. It's ongoing. It doesn't surprise me that our ruling class should do that, because it deflects instantly blame from themselves, which is their failure to address the reality of the problem, the failure to marshal resources to deal with the problem and to go on holiday during the fires. That they simply left the country to burn. And so there is an anger as well as a new awareness that's generated when the public loses trust in the political class to do not only what is decent, but also what is required by the positions they hold. So they have failed abjectly to uphold even the weakest traditions within what we would call a parliamentary democracy.
Est-ce que vous avez essayé de les comprendre avec un autre prisme de lecture, les comprendre, la classe politique? Est-ce que vous avez essayé de comprendre que pour eux, à court terme, la menace économique est beaucoup plus dévastatrice et délétère que la menace écologique? C'est-à-dire qu'ils font une politique symptomatique parce que le danger d'un déraillement, d'une défaillance du système économique, si on dit, voilà, maintenant vous allez arrêter d'épuiser le biotope parce que c'est plus possible, les systèmes financiers vont faire la tête. Et donc la menace de déstabilisation du système économique, pour eux, est peut-être 1000 fois plus importante que 1 milliard de kangourous cramés.
Of course, you are correct in that diagnosis. That's exactly what's going on. But we could call it short-termism. It will succeed for a while, but again, like the Wizard of Oz, the fraudulent nature of that response will be exposed. And so I would argue that the economic system is a subset of the ecological. Herman Daly argued that in the 1970s with his concept of the steady state economy. There's nothing new in that idea, and it's certainly not something that I claim credit for. But it's just basic thermodynamics, it's basic science. It's telling you that you can't have infinite growth in a finite system. And you push that idea too far with, yes, we can do whatever we like and we can just continue to exploit, it will hit the wall. And in Australia, it's already hit the wall. Has it hit it hard enough yet? I'm waiting to see. It's like this is politics unfolding in front of us.
J'ai quelques questions d'un ami qui s'appelle Pablo Servigne, qui me les a envoyées. Je vais vous en poser 2-3. La première, c'est: sommes-nous prêts émotionnellement à affronter le 21e siècle? Pour affronter le 21e siècle?
My answer is we are not emotionally ready because we've not had the appropriate language, the appropriate conceptual development, the appropriate critique of the useless, the redundant language that we've tried in the immediate past to deal with these problems. I don't wish to claim that I'm the only person attempting to deal with this issue through an emotional lens, but I would have to say that I'm pleased to take credit for being a pioneer, and I would like to see this approach taken by many more people so that we can see the role of the emotions as central to our future in the 21st century and not some kind of bit player or something that we should ignore because something in the 19th century or someone told us that the emotions were not a valid human experience and that should be excluded from decision making or excluded from the realm of knowledge even. It was to be left to the realm of intuition. And I go back to that point that good science and good emotions work together to produce a good society. And so I would argue that the reclaiming the role of emotions, good emotions, is integral to our future in the 21st century, and that if we do not do this, I think the extinction of our emotions will proceed apace and that we'll become incapable of resisting the very forces that you keep raising, which are we're being deadened, we're being, our responses are being snuffed out by forces that are so great that they anticipate every action that we might take and then commercialize it and make it inert.
On rentrerait dans l'ère de la barbarie.
Yes, I wish I understood the barbarity more intimately. I'm not a student of it, but I think I know what you're getting at.
J'ai une autre question pour vous, toujours de Pablo. Est-ce qu'on se remet de la solastalgie ou est-ce que ça va durer toute la vie?
The answer from the optimist, Glenn Albrecht philosopher, is that yes, solastalgia is a condition that can be reversed. The idea that it's somehow locked in place, that we can never escape it, and as one futurist, Sterling described it, it will do you in. He was saying it's such a deep and debilitating condition to get in. You'll never get out of it, and like the old nostalgia, it could kill you.
It could kill you like Michael Ruppert? You know this guy?
No, I haven't heard of this guy.
A former guy from the CIA. He was very, very depressed about What's going on with the
Ah,
heart?
the guy that self-immolated in New York.
No, he just cut his throat. Like a man.
Look, the extreme response is tragic from a purely human perspective. But I think it's possible to address the causes of solastalgia, and I mentioned in our conversation earlier that restoration and repair are just one of the things that you can do to address it. Fighting the system that causes it, I've been involved with community groups that have taken Rio Tinto to court, that have taken the state government of New South Wales to court. And in addition to the standard environmental impacts of dust and noise and water and loss of biodiversity, solastalgia went to court as a condition that people were experiencing that was negative and that was being imposed on them and was not in any way justifiable, not even in terms of the economic benefits that the coal mine would bring to people of that area. And we won, only to have the state government actually overturn that victory by changing the legislation so that only economic considerations could prevail in a decision by the planning authorities. So we lost. But it shows that the fight can happen on various levels, and there have been, there's been at least one major court case in Australia just decided last year where a coal mine has been refused, and included in the judgment was the grounds that solastalgia was something that could not be imposed by a coal mine on an unwilling community, and so the permission to begin this mine was refused. And so my answer to the question is you can challenge the forces that deliver solastalgia. You can engage in a form of reform that's both reform of the biophysical environment that's being damaged. You engage in reform of the political and economic processes that cause that damage, and in the process you are capable of reforming and repairing your damaged psyche. The solastalgia can be relieved and removed.
Une autre question, que pensez-vous de la théorie des 5 stades, de la fin de vie de Kübler-Ross et autres théories du deuil? Est-ce que ça peut aider à traverser cette tempête?
It's a very complex question, and I'm sure the answer should be a complex one. But I see grief, it's a response to our need to understand the situation we're now in. Grief, technically, as I understand it in the English language, is a feeling that comes when we lose contact with a living person. They die and our intimate relationships with them must cease. The 5th stage of Kübler-Ross is acceptance, if we get that far. And I think that's the most disastrous position we could possibly take to the situation we're now in. We must not accept the grief. We must rebel against it or fight it. So people now talk about different types of grief. We put eco in front of grief. We've done just about everything with grief that we can do, and the same for some other well-known human emotions. And although I appreciate and understand the rationale for doing that, I would prefer that we take more care with the emotional language that we're using. The climate doesn't die. Even though it may be damaged, it's still there. We can't destroy the environment, broadly understood. It may be changed in ways that we don't like it, but it's not something that is no longer present in our lives. It's still there. We might think that we can extinguish all life on the planet, but there are in fact bacteria that like living in the hot vents of undersea volcanoes. There are some that like it even hotter. You know, they're hyper heat-loving bacteria. So it's a form of arrogance to think that we could actually destroy or extinguish completely the things that we're currently addressing as massive problems. So the notion that we should be grieving is appropriate for things that we have lost, that are extinct. But even there, I think the human culture and the concept of grief has relevance in all human cultures, and we have our ways of understanding it and expressing our grief. And sometimes we just have to take ideas from our culture and put it in a new context. And so I'm fully supportive of that. I mean, I give the example in the book of the Inuit there, of the North Arctic, experiencing rapid negative environmental change with the loss of sea ice. Their sadness was difficult for them to comprehend. One way they addressed it was to take a word from their culture, which was ugianatuk, which means a friend who is acting strangely. So it's like you go to the bar with your best friend, they have too much to drink, and they start throwing punches at you and arguing in a way that you find disturbing. Your friend is now acting in an unpredictable and strange way. They didn't have a word for the way the climate was acting, but it was similar to or analogous to the way this friend had turned bad. So they described the climate as turning ugianatuk. And that's an indication that all cultures are struggling to find the language, the terminology, to describe these really profound changes that are taking place. So I think we're in a stage now where we're struggling to find the appropriate words to describe this emotional turmoil, this mess that we're in. My task has been to attempt to be more precise than just to put eco in front of grief and say that that's now what we are experiencing. I have problems not only with the application of grief, but also the eco. Eco comes from oikos, which means in the Greek the management of the household, the rule of the household. And I don't particularly like a word that has implications of human dominance and management being applied to the situation that we are in now, where human dominance and management actually caused the problems that are now giving us, in inverted commas, grief. And so to put eco in front of it is not only insulting to Indigenous people who have a more intimate relationship to the rest of life than it being described within the confines of the oikos. So there's a problem there. It's a form of cultural appropriation in a sense, where we use systems bioscience to describe every one of their experiences in relation to the rest of the world. Well, I don't think that's particularly productive of the way we should go. And the other oikos, the economy, the management of the economy, we now talk about natural capital, we talk about biodiversity offsetting, all of those things are where we attempt to say that if we are good capitalists, we'll begin to see how we can green capitalism, the oikos becomes green and we'll live happily ever after. Well, it's an incredibly dangerous position to take, yes. I take your point.
Désolé de faire des choses que les gens ne voient pas, mais on s'est bien compris. J'ai une question d'Internet qui est très courte, mais qui est lourde de signification. Une question de Louis-Jacques. Que pense-t-il des problèmes liés aux réfugiés climatiques?
Again, it's an incredibly complex issue. I think about it in many ways. One of them is that already we're seeing a world profoundly shaped and altered by global warming and changes in the climate that are forcing people to move from one place to another. Sea level rise will magnify that many times. So I can see a future where climate refugees are going to be in the millions, if not billions. And it will affect all continents and all islands. So it's not as if somebody is going to suffer from this and others are going to miss out. The idea that we can just accommodate that peacefully that's utopian. It will cause huge problems for humanity. And I address that in the book by arguing that we need an emergent hybrid culture that accepts some of the past and the validity and importance of geography. You know, the Earth is not uniform. It generates different responses to different places. People from another place come to by force. They've been forcibly removed from their home, their homeland, their space. They have to adjust to the way of life of those that take them in. And those that take them in are already have experienced the homogenization of the world. They've also experienced the colonization of other species, small and large, from all over the place. So this idea of some kind of pure space that needs to be protected has to be abandoned. And at the same time, the idea that the migrant can just simply bring their view of the world and their relationship to the environment and agriculture and other things and not be influenced by their host. It's all over, whether it was climate change doing this or something completely different. We're now in a space that requires this creative response, and it's not one that's left or right, it's not one that's based on the past. It's a future that has to be constructed. And of course, it's too easy just to say that we need to do this. How do we bring it about? What are the technicalities? And I put out a message of, well, please help. I'm struggling with these complex issues. We need more people to begin to address all of these difficult questions.
J'ai une autre question d'Internet que je vais essayer de reformuler, de ne pas dénaturer. Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas que d'avoir inventé le mot solastalgie, ce n'est pas une façon de psychiatriser les gens qui parlent de la collapsologie et donc de les discréditer ?
Yes, it's a criticism of my work that I think I can put it this way, that it's like the social construction of reality or the invention of a new mental illness that can then be addressed by medicalization or some kind of professional class that deals with these problems. It's as far away from my thoughts when I was creating the concept as is possible, but like the intentionalist fallacy in art and literature, I accept that other people can make interpretations that are not those that I have thought of myself. And that means that I have to be more careful in the way I express things. I have to be fully aware of the fact that misinterpretation can take place. But when I would describe myself as taking a risk by creating the concept of solastalgie, and that as a result I sometimes didn't express myself clearly. I used terms like illness without realizing that people might think I was medicalizing the problem or creating a new psychological problem that is just a fabrication. However, I mean, concepts get tested not only in academia and at times very rigorously by very sharp minds, but also in the way people respond to the word. And so if it's accepted widely in a wide variety of contexts, it means that it's got some scope, some ability to engage people. And also I've even had Indigenous people in Australia come up to me and say that they approve of the concept because it describes something that's happening to them which their own language was unable to fully articulate. And that goes back to the Ugi Anatuk issue, that all cultures are now struggling with this process of rapid and global change, and that the subtitle of the book is New Words for a New World, and I mean it. We're struggling to articulate the very things that we're discussing now because our language is impoverished with respect to these very issues, and it's impoverished because we haven't had to deal with them in the past. They're not part of our evolutionary or cultural experience as a globalized species.
J'ai une autre question de la communauté. Je vais vous la poser en anglais avec mon plus bel accent parce qu'ils l'ont posée en anglais. Ils ont fait l'effort de la poser en anglais. How do the words and the language could reverse the effect of the authoritary and arbitrary laws of physics? What a word could do against anthropoi, except telling ourselves some fairy tales, and relieved our good consciences. Conscience.
So is it about... I wasn't sure about the laws of physics. I fight entropy wherever I see it. So, I fight conceptual entropy, where our concepts become lost in a kind of meaningless, homogeneous, boring and uninteresting universe, which I presume is the end result of the second law of thermodynamics. So if I understand the question properly, how do I personally respond to this this breakdown of what is interesting and vital about life on Earth and its destruction by those that wish to just turn it into the heat death of the universe? Well, life is a strategy which opposes entropy and decay, and I dedicate my life to that fight. I'm also a father and a grandfather. I also happen to think that life is inherently good and that death is incredibly boring. And so to be on the side of life, I think it's a good fight. And I use my abilities as a thinker to construct a future for humanity where life becomes much more important than it is in this current situation, this current era that we're in, this Anthropocene that I call it the obscene. It's not capable of valuing life beyond the egocentric and beyond the privileged.
Si je vous dis « Heureux les simples d'esprit », aujourd'hui j'ai compris.
Right. Well, I've even tried to revive our spirituality in my work with the notion of the Geist, a secular spirituality that reveres life. I have no idea how successful that idea will be, but I think the traditional merchants of spirituality have had their day, and I'm attempting to secularize that which I find amazing and wonderful about life. And I call it the Geist because the Ged in the old Indo-European languages is it's the root for words like to gather, together, and good. It has its origins in that ancient prefix. So I'm willing to again try something new, given that I see the failure of the past to deliver something which is relevant for the 21st century. And so I don't just do it because I like inventing things. I do it because I see something missing that needs to be filled in, that needs us as humans to start a really good and detailed and exciting conversation about what it means to have a spiritual life in a secular world. It may be crazy, but I'm having a go at that as well.
Combien vous gagnez en tant que retraité?
Zero. It costs me money to do what I do. I don't earn anything.
Combien vous gagnez avec votre pension de retraite?
I cashed it in on OLIVAE farm to grow vegetables and fruit trees. I don't have any investments myself in the stock market or a pension. I'm a kept man in some respects because my wife does have a pension, but I decided I couldn't have my money in a system that I was trying to bring down. But luckily, my wife is not as crazy as I am, so she looks after me.
On va parler d'un Australien, du plus français des Australiens, Julian Assange. Est-ce qu'on peut dire un mot sur Julian Assange?
It takes me away from my area of knowledge, but what can I say?
Est-ce que c'est un mécanisme de défense que vous utilisez là?
No, it's just that, I followed WikiLeaks. I understand the position that Assange is in. Not only do I support WikiLeaks, I support the immediate release of Assange, assuming that he's committed no crimes against Sweden or Swedes, and that his treatment is an abomination of justice. So I'm fully supportive of those that would like to see somebody who has attempted to make the truth known to the public in a way that the forces of authoritarianism would like it to have the lid firmly put on. I have some concerns when information can be released that may indeed lead to the indirect or direct harm of others. But I can't see that that's actually been the case with the WikiLeaks and the information that's been released. So I'm of the view that here's an Australian who's a world citizen who's suffering an ongoing injustice, and one of the worst that I've seen in contemporary society.
On arrive à la fin de notre interview. On a pour habitude de poser 2 dernières questions. La première, c'est est-ce que vous avez 3 livres à conseiller à notre communauté? Et la dernière, c'est est-ce que vous avez un conseil pour les jeunes générations? Et rappelez-moi comment s'appelle votre livre?
It's called Earth Emotions, New Words for a New World. So that's a good book for people to read. I won't use it as one of the 3. It's very difficult. I read widely and I'm influenced by a huge number of people. So if I come closer to the area that inspires me, that gives me something to contemplate that then enriches my own work, I read the work of Robert Macfarlane, the English writer who's published a book called Underland, which is about the emotional and psychic connections to the world that we normally evade beyond our immediate senses and often below the ground. And so that's something that I think most people would see as having some kind of close connection to my own work. In terms of environmental philosophy and inspiration, I get great inspiration from reading the works of Aldo Leopold and the essay Thinking Like a Mountain is one that has resonated throughout my life from the very first time I read it. And so that's another very important book, so I hope it's available in translation. I'm sure it would be. It's been published since the early 1950s, so it's there. And for, again, I'm not a person who writes about nature, so I'm not a nature writer. I write about humans and their emotional responses. But I read a book called The Peregrine by A.J. Baker, an English writer, about his observations of this amazing bird. Being a bird lover and somebody who's spent most of his adult life trying to seek the company of birds and enjoy sharing this world with them, I would recommend that people read The Peregrine by Baker, not only because it's a brilliant piece of writing, and there's no doubt that in the English language I found his power of writing and his ability to describe and to bring the reader into a world that perhaps no longer exists. It's written in post-war England. The book describes the life of the peregrine falcon through the eyes of this observer, the bird observer. But it's also, it has many aspects that connect directly to my work. At one point, Baker stumbles across a dead bird. Its colour is yellow, and he worries that the bird has been poisoned. It doesn't just died. And he takes that further and talks about the stench of money beginning to invade the life of birds. And similar to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, there's this concern about the role of humans in bringing about what we would now call ecocide or tierracide, the destruction or death of the earth. And he also wrote about something that I quote in the book, Earth Emotions, which is our inability to pay attention and to observe what's going on around us, particularly what remains of the natural world. So he describes a man walking across a bridge or a dike next to the ocean. He's engrossed in his map, and the map is flapping around, and he's doing nothing but try to get his vision focused on the map. And above him, 10,000 migratory waders go straight over his head and shine and glint in the sunlight, but he doesn't see them. And I see that as similar to the world that we live in now. It's like I'm in the taxi coming to this interview, and there are people right next to the Eiffel Tower, but all they're doing is looking at their phones, and one of the world's most famous architectural statements is next to them, but they haven't got the time to look at it. Well, if we're doing that in the city, you can imagine that, the starlings that are calling, or the ravens that still eke out an existence in our detritus and our pollution, nobody pays attention to them either. And so it's this extinction of the emotions that and the extinctions of experience that trouble me more than anything. And out of reading a book about the peregrine falcon, these gems of insight resonate inside me and become contemporary, become global. The map has been replaced by Google Earth and the mobile phone. It's exactly the same thing, that instead of looking at nature unmediated, we're now trying to look at it through a lens, trying to look at it through an abstract mapping of the world which makes sense to us but doesn't actually correspond to the real world at all. And so it's a kind of myopia that we have, a blindness to the minutiae of the world, which is incredibly interesting. It's all absorbing if you pay attention to it. It's hugely entertaining, it's often beautiful, it's inspiring. For people to miss out on that is a tragedy. So I'm hoping that my work and creating words that actually try and describe those positive states. We haven't discussed them at all in this interview, but I talk about Eutieria as a good earth feeling, a positive oneness with the earth, that oceanic experience that surfers, Freudians and some Christians share. It's an odd collection, but nevertheless that's the way it is. One word to describe that oceanic experience is, but it requires of us to pay attention to what's going on in the world, to empathise with it, and occasionally to join with it, to have an engagement that's so profound that there's no longer a separation between the knower and the known.
J'ouvre une petite parenthèse entre vous et moi. J'ouvre une petite parenthèse entre vous et moi. Le cannabis, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Tried it as a young man. It enhanced my appetite greatly. It enabled the enjoyment of music in a utopian way, which is beyond that which is normal, beyond that which is to be expected in some respects. So when I returned to a state of normality, a non-enhanced state, I sometimes felt disappointed that reality didn't correspond with utopia. But after a while I realised that reality is all we've got, and utopia is a form of escapism that I've managed to avoid mostly in my adult life, except for good red wine.
Donc notre dernière question, encore un conseil pour les jeunes générations?
Well, I think to rebel is the core of my advice, that Extinction Rebellion and Greta are on the right track. And I've participated in the school strikes in Newcastle, my closest city to where I live. And I've seen in the youth, in particular, a vision of the future which is at least similar to what I have with respect to the Symbiocene. It's a rejection of the present and the past, and a desire, an intense and strong desire to see themselves in a future that they create themselves, that they are comfortable to be in, and more than comfortable, it's to be excited about that future. So I think these are genuine Homo sapiens. They're beginning to use their intelligence in a way that the rest of us perhaps have failed to do. We've been content with burning and exploding things, which is barely any advance on the Stone Age. The burning and exploding is expressed through the climate change issue, and it's come back to hurt us. So I think this generation that wants to use the intelligence that humans have are on a different track. I think it entails, as it's described by Naomi Klein and others, as this changes everything moment. They have no stake in the present. They don't own anything. They can see the future as business as usual, as entirely destructive. And so I don't have to give them any advice. I think they've already got the idea of where to go. Perhaps if I might be indulgent for a moment, I would like to think that the idea of the Symbiocene is a vision of the future that they would like to embrace. The point of having this vision of a future that's desirable is to work hard to achieve it. If you rebel with no vision of an alternative to the present, it's confusing and perhaps even counterproductive, because what are you rebelling against in order to move towards? Even if it's a transition and not a rebellion, you still need a vision of the future that's more than a vacant hope that it will be better than the present. So that's what I see as, it's not advice, it's just once you're in the Symbiocene, you can't get out of it. It's a place where you wish to stay forever. So it does have the potential to drive innovation. It's endlessly creative. It requires enormous amounts of work that has no end. There's no unemployment in the Symbiocene. And that to me is a vision of the future that's worth embracing. The dystopian future, the sitting in the corner rocking back and forth with your hands over your head, the giving up of hope and the embracing of grief is, acceptance of that, I've already said. I entirely reject it. I'm with those who are resisting strongly, and probably if that resistance needs help from an aging baby boomer, then I'd be very pleased to offer it. Whatever strength I have left, it's now devoted to helping them.
Glenn Albrecht, merci.
Well, thank you for having me and your challenging program.